Okay, going to give folks a few more moments to finish connecting into the audio and hopping into this room with us. But I hope you all had a lovely lunch break and were able to take care of yourselves a little bit. And welcome back. We're going to dive right into Grieving in Community with Wendy Black-Stern. I almost called you Miss Wendy. My son calls her Miss Wendy, so almost did it, but stopped myself. Wendy is a lovely yoga therapist and teacher. She is a group facilitator, speaker, and internationally known yoga teacher trainer. She specializes in this space of somatic and mindful grieving, and it is such a gift to have her with us here today. I have the great pleasure of knowing her personally, and she's just such a light in all of our lives. She has dedicated her life's work to serving those who are deep in grief. And that has given us all such a gift to be able to walk alongside her on our personal grief journeys. So Wendy, thank you so much for being here, and very excited to hear from you. As far as grieving in community, I know that this is a topic near and dear to your heart, and one that was really at the core of why GSN was founded. So I will pass it over to you in just one moment. I do want to give everyone those safety reminders for this space, that this is meant to be a brave and safe space, one that is free of judgment and hate. And although the chat function is open, I will be monitoring it to make sure that everything is kept safe and secure. And for your own security and knowledge, we will be removing folks that abuse the chat function throughout the summit. And we do have everyone muted. We will likely remain muted most of the time, but please do not unmute yourselves unless you are called upon. And if you have any questions, feel free to funnel them through the chat. I know Wendy will use it at some points to interact with everyone, but yeah, I will let you take it away, Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Nice to see a lot of your faces back from our morning practice. Hope you all had a nice lunch break. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. I'll say another few words about myself, and then we'll get right into our conversation today on grieving in community. As Sarah said, I am a yoga therapist and group facilitator and have been for the past 20 plus years. And also the founder of the Grief Support Network and the Center for Somatic Grieving. And my life took a very radical turn, I'll say. After losing my first child, I lost my son, Noah. And that's really what brought me to this work. And it took my experience as a yoga therapist, and I dived right on into grief because that's where I was. And so in my personal journey, community was the key to my healing. And I didn't know that. I didn't know how important it was until I was going through loss. And a part of my story is my husband and I actually left the country right after we lost Noah, because it was just so hard to be here with other people's discomfort with our pain. People didn't really know what to say or how to be with us. It was the elephant in the room. And so we left this country seeking a culture that could teach us how to do it, because we just didn't feel equipped. We just didn't know how to do it, which seems to be something that other people can relate to. A lack of role models, maybe a lack of other people knowing how to engage with us. So we traveled to Bali and to Thailand and throughout Southeast Asia. And what we found there is that other cultures weren't afraid of us, and that they weren't afraid of death. They saw it as a part of life. And therefore, they were able to lean in towards us in our pain. And this was a few weeks after our loss. So we had grief like written all over us. And that opened the door for our healing to begin, to be able to say his name, to be able to talk about it, to be able to not be okay. We were messy. We were like, at times a puddle on the floor. And to be received by these cultures, by people we didn't even know, who could just be with us in that. Really kind of changed my life and made a huge impact. So throughout our travels, we experienced, how other cultures dealt with grief. We experienced rituals, we experienced mindfulness practices, but what was the most significant was just the way people related to us. And so on our journey, we actually got pregnant with my daughter, Hannah, a month after our son had died, and we came home. And what we found was that it was very difficult to fit back into our life. We had changed. And over the years to come, that experience, was a driving force for me to want to do something about it and to want to offer people here in our country something that I didn't have, which was a feeling of community around me, which is an interesting to say because I had a very vibrant, beautiful community that I was a part of. They just didn't always know what to do or what to say. And so I started the Grief Support Network as a referral network at first to create connection, to help people figure out what they needed and to connect them to different practitioners. But what we found in this first kind of version of the Grief Support Network, and this was in 2012, so it's been some time, was that we were connecting people to people, but we weren't bringing them into the same room. And that to actually feel community, that we need to come together into a space, virtual or in person, but that we needed to actually see each other, hear each other, feel each other. And so this is what led to our yoga therapy programming, which is really the cornerstone of the Grief Support Network today. And, this idea of coming together in community is right at the center of it. Yes, it's helping us to come into our bodies and to feel. And yes, there's this mindfulness piece where we really learn to be present. This idea of community is the glue and the cornerstone, because grief can be lonely. I know for myself, I isolated because it was easier to be alone than to be with other people's discomfort on top of my own. So the intention here with grieving in community is not only to come together, but to create a safe space and a container where we can all show up as we are and meet each other wherever we're at that day. A bit of kind of what my story and what led me here. And we'll spend some time today kind of unpacking and talking about the different aspects of grieving in community, why this is important, why this can really make a difference in our own healing. And also a little bit about some of the cultural stigma that can kind of prevent us from wanting to be out in the world when we are in our grief, and which causes us to isolate in the first place. So we're going to have a moment here to just do a quick centering. I know some of you are with me from morning practice, so you might feel quite centered already. But for those of us just showing up, we're going to just sit for a few minutes and kind of gather ourselves within. And the reason is that we hear and receive information differently once we are grounded and connected in ourselves. Okay, so just take a moment to come into your seat. Wherever you're sitting is totally fine. It could be a couch, or if you're on the floor, on a cushion, or maybe you're sitting in a chair. Just take a few moments to settle into your own container of self here. You can close your eyes if that feels comfortable. And you just take a few moments here to drop into your body, to feel your breath. And to transition from the external world to a place inside. And allowing your breath to serve as that gentle entryway or touchstone to come into deeper connection with yourself. With the next few breaths, you can scan your body, noticing sensations Noticing any thoughts or emotions. And the invitation here is just to simply notice. Another few moments here to feel into your own body and your own container of self, connecting with self. Knowing that whatever you're feeling here is okay. There's no particular way you're supposed to feel. To let your awareness expand to take in our collective space, feeling into the different people that we are in this space with today, the collective container that we share. Another few moments, another few breaths to feel into that. I know we are all truly in this together. And that we don't have to do it alone. And with your next few breaths, just noticing if there's an intention here for yourself, something you would like to get out of this conversation, out of our time here today. And you could take a falling out breath with that. Breath in through your nose, exhaling out with a sigh. Ah. And as you're ready, you can let your eyes just softly flutter open, and we'll come back. Come back to our collective space. Hi, everyone. I'm always amazed that even through a screen, how everyone looks different after we sit for a minute and just feel ourselves. So this idea of grieving in community, what does that really mean? I want to start there. What does it really mean to do this together? And again, this is really the center of the Grief Support Network's mission, is to teach us, to show us what this looks like, and to talk about why we need it. So the kind of the why and the what does this even mean is the idea of having a safe space where we can all show up as we are. And grief is messy. So a lot of the reasons we isolate and don't come out into the world we're grieving is it doesn't feel acceptable. So creating a space like this is for you here today, where not only is it going to be messy, but whatever you're feeling is okay, where you know that you will be unconditionally loved and accepted. This is really at the center of what we're doing. And there are some ways that we actually can create safety where that feels okay. So to be held in community, it has to be safe to do so. So this idea of having a space that is unconditionally loving and accepting isn't always the way that it is in the world, right? And so we create these spaces with our intention. And this is what the Grief Support Network really, above all else, has to offer, is to know that no matter what you're feeling, whether it be joy, we get to feel joy when we're grieving too, or happiness or something positive, or the depths of our sorrow or pain, whatever it is you're holding, that is acceptable and it's okay. And so we come together in that, and through that we get to be ourselves. So being in community is vulnerable, right, when we're grieving. And vulnerability can only happen, again, when we feel safe enough to share our feelings. And it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable when we're grieving. But when we can find that courage, when we have a space that can hold us, this vulnerability is really what opens the door for so much healing to happen. Because when we're vulnerable, our true self comes out. And when we are received in our true self, and then have that reflected back to us with acceptance and love, then we can see and know ourselves better. So this idea of being together in our grief, it offers us something that we can't get by ourselves alone, which is a reflection, which is to be witnessed in that vulnerability and in our authentic experience, which again takes courage. So this is for some almost a new concept in the culture we live in. And I'm going to speak to that for a moment, of kind of some of the cultural piece that can kind of keep us from coming together in this way. And I think it stems from living in a very individualistic culture, where you get a lot of pats on the back for being strong, for having it together, for being able to keep going no matter what. No matter what's happening, you've got it, you can keep going, and putting on a happy face. For any of you who have been through loss, which I think is everybody, and I'm sure all of us here, that is like a really hard thing to do, or in the depths of our pain. And it can feel really bad to put on this happy face and pretend we're happy when we're hurting inside, right? It is like inauthentic for us to be there. Yet there's an expectation at our jobs, in our communities, in most of the spaces that we exist in, that we're supposed to like get over it and move on, right? And so this idea of not having to do that, and of actually being and having a space where it's acceptable to not be okay, is a part of it. And so breaking this stigma means taking a stand on this, as a culture, and creating more room and space for people to actually feel what they feel. So part of this work is breaking through some of these cultural stigmas and the idea that we're supposed to look or feel a certain way when we are grieving. And other cultures do it differently, so we can learn from that. I know for myself, I didn't feel like there were a lot of role models. Like I actually didn't really know how to do it, because there weren't a lot of teachings around like, how do we grieve together? What does that look like? I had an experience with an amazing spiritual teacher, Sobonfu Some. If any of you are familiar with Sobonfu and Malidoma Some, who travel the world leading grief rituals. And they are spiritual leaders from West Africa. Sobonfu has passed away since then. But what they do is they bring people into a collective space. They create altars that honor their ancestors, and we grieve together. And what that means is we wail. We wail. We cry, or we sit quietly. It doesn't have to be loud, but whatever it is okay. We cry, we talk, we sit, and we support each other, and we witness each other and hold each other in that. And for me, this was a life-changing experience, to see that we could really let our feelings come out. And this is one of the main principles of the mindful grieving work that the Grief Support Network offers, is that we have to feel it to heal it. And in community, we get to have a container or a boundary for that holds it safe. So we can learn from other cultures. We can lean in towards each other when we're grieving and in pain, and offer a reflection of what we're feeling, and to know that it is all welcomed, and it is all valid, and it is all okay, which is not often the way that we're received when we're grieving. So these are some of the main principles, or the main ideas of what does this mean to look like to come into community. Loneliness is often a secondary kind of loss that we feel when we're grieving. And I know for myself, as I shared, it was almost easier to be alone than to be in spaces where my grief didn't feel acceptable. And that loneliness can really take us down. That loneliness can create such a sense of disconnection and can actually pull us deeper into a place of kind of despair, or we can almost get stuck in our own universe, right? And so the antidote to that loneliness is connection. And this is why community offers us something that we really can't get. it offers us the opportunity to be in connection with others, which actually allows our energy to move. When we're in connection, there's an energetic quality to that can give us a lift. It can give us a little bit of light. We can actually receive and feed off each other rather than the opposite, which is to kind of wallow, or sometimes I felt like I was drowning in my own grief. It was so big. And when I was alone, it overcame me at times. And then when I were to come into connection, I number one got to see that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't the only one grieving or in pain or wanting to be in connection. And then to be witnessed in that helped me to see and know myself better. So I want to talk about the idea of witness presence for a moment in this conversation. Okay. So when we are, number one, present with ourselves, right? It can be a place that we actually receive respite from our pain and suffering. That may sound counterintuitive, right? It's counterintuitive to lean in towards something that hurts, right? It's like we reach towards a flame, there's pain, we retract. That's like human nature. And it's also wisdom of our bodies. However, grief requires something a little different. When we are present with ourselves, with what we're feeling in our bodies, with our emotions, with our thoughts, with our feelings, with all the things that come along with our grief, it can actually give us a place of respite from the pain. And the reason is that in the future, when we go to the future, that is often where we have anxiety around how are we going to live without this person or this thing or this something in our life. It's where we can feel not only anxious, but unsettled and unsure of how we're going to go on. How are we going to do this? In the past is where all the memories lie. The past is often that longing, that yearning for someone or something that we no longer have. So there's a lot of discomfort and often pain and suffering when we go into the future and we go into the past. The present moment, in this exact moment, if we can stay right here with our breath, is a place that we can just be, And so again, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but cultivating presence, and then to do that with the support of community, is one of the most powerful ways I know to heal. And when we're grieving, we have to like dip our toe in a little bit at a time, right? It can mean baby steps. It can mean baby steps to lean in towards our feelings at all. I know for myself in the beginning, I was terrified to show up on my yoga mat because it was the place that I knew I would feel. And I was so scared that if I felt it all, that it would literally swallow me up and I would never be okay. However, my yoga mat actually became my sanctuary because once I learned that I could just feel a little bit at a time and I could control that, right? I could also bring myself back and pull myself out when I needed to. That gave me the courage and it felt safe enough to go in a little deeper each time. So cultivating presence in my own self was the first step. And then bringing that into community, into a circle where it's a safe space to feel and then to share what you're feeling was really what opened the door for healing to happen. And this is what I've witnessed in hundreds and hundreds of people over the last decade of this idea of coming into community. Truth is, we're not supposed to do it alone. So we have to actually learn how to do it together. So the other side of kind of this witness presence idea is the witnessing. When we are witnessed by a group of people and receive a reflection, when someone can then reflect that back of what we're feeling, of what we're experiencing, of what we say, when we get a reflection back, it helps us to clarify often what we're feeling. And it also validates what we're feeling. One of the biggest reasons we can get stuck in our grief is when it feels unacceptable, when we're not validated by the outside world it can be really hard to validate ourselves that what we feel is true or okay. So in community, we get that reflection. When we are witnessed, we get validation from the outside and from the inside that what we feel is okay. And when we are validated in our experience, energy can move. We get stuck when we constrict. And we constrict when we feel judged and when it feels unacceptable to feel what we're feeling. So community gives us this incredible, powerful opportunity to be witnessed, to be seen, for what we feel to become real and to be known, and then to reflect it back to us with unconditional love and acceptance. And that is an important piece. For community to be safe while we're grieving, there needs to be some guidelines, right? There needs to be support for you not to be judged. At the Grief Support Network, we have guidelines that hold that safe and that make it very clear, and that this is a place where all feelings are valid and accepted. So that's one side of it, is getting that reflection so that we can finally exhale and know that what we're feeling is okay, that we can say it out loud, we can make it real, and then we can receive the reflection back. The other side of it is listening to each other. So what we do is we create a learning community when we're grieving together. We learn from each other. We hear each other's experiences. And I know for myself, sitting in a circle, every single person's experience touches something in myself. Sometimes when we're grieving, we can feel crazy, like our thoughts are like crazy. And then all of a sudden you're sitting in a circle and you hear all these other people saying what you're feeling. And it's like, wow, I'm not crazy. What a relief. And good to know I'm not alone. So we learn from each other's experiences. We are validated in knowing that other people are feeling these things too. And it creates this rich support system that then allows us to go deeper. That allows us to get all the feelings out. That allows us to let the grief move through us so we don't have to carry the burden of it through our lives. So the other side of that is when we are isolated, when we are doing it or trying to do it by ourselves, that feeling of stuckness or constriction can create such a burden. It creates in our bodies that we then have to carry with us. And over time, that burden gets heavy. That burden can interfere with other relationships, and it can completely inform the way we see the world. Grief is also so deeply interwoven with trauma. It's really hard to go through significant loss and to not have there be an element of trauma that's deeply woven in. They're kind of like cousins, grief and trauma. So in community, as we're getting a reflection, as we're learning from each other, we can also be supported to kind of tease apart like a pure feeling of grief, which is truly the reaction to losing someone or something that we love. And we're talking about all kinds of grief here, just to say, not just the loss of a person, but the loss of maybe a job or a relationship or a part of yourself. It's all grief, right? So I just lost my train of thought. Hold on a second. I got to find where I was. That is so funny. I went somewhere else and now I have to come back. We were talking about Sarah, can you actually help me exactly where I was?
Embarrassingly enough, I could not.
That's okay. I'm just going to keep going.
Sorry.
We were talking about learning from each other and knowing that we're not alone when we are in this space together. So I want to take just a little pause here and just let us all take a few breaths and just to kind of take in. I know this is kind of a lot, like a lot of talking and a lot of sharing around what we get from doing this together. And I want to give everyone a moment just to sit with their own thoughts and their own experience. And also feel free as we're going to put any questions or comments into the chat that we can speak to. I have a little bit more that I want to share, and then I will open it up to questions and answers, and we can get into more of a conversation around it. I remembered where I was going. So here's the other piece of it. in community, we learn from each other, as I was saying. But when we can be together in a way where we're not trying to fix each other, where we're not offering advice or a solution, where we're really just holding space. And this idea of holding space is at the center of grieving in community. And we're holding a space where it all can just be. That is a very different way of being together in our grief. When we offer advice, even though it comes from such a good place, such a well-meaning place of trying to help, we can almost rob each other of the opportunity to be empowered actually by our grief and to find our own wisdom. So in community, we can learn from each other, we can hear each other, we can be received, but the invitation is to actually have our own experience and to find our own wisdom through the process. So when we're a witness and when we have someone who can be that mirror for us, or a group of people who can be that mirror for us to know our own truth, that's where the real change begins to happen, is when that wisdom comes from within, rather than other people telling us how to think or feel. I know when I was grieving, I had no patience for people telling me how to feel or telling me I understand when they didn't. People are well-meaning and people just don't know what to say or do sometimes. And so what we're creating here is a culture that knows how to grieve. I mean, the name itself of our summit, Let's Grieve, like, let's talk about this. Let's do this together. Let's be real. Let's be authentic. Let's be messy. Let's be in spaces where we can just show up and be together and be in connection and have good days and bad days, and a culture where it's okay not to be okay, and where we can support each other to lean in towards our own feelings, towards our own wisdom, and empower each other to find our own answers through our grief. Grief is a powerful catalyst for personal growth and change. We would never choose maybe our loss. We would never choose to go through it. Yet we all will or have at some point in our lives, right? It is absolutely a part of the human experience. And when we do, there's a lot that we learn about ourselves through the process. At the end of the day, in community, if we can receive a reflection of ourselves and love ourselves more, that is a gift that our grief can give us, because it opens us. It opens us to everything. It opens us to life itself. And so if we can feel the supportive community like arms around us while we're falling apart, right? While we're going through it, while we are in the darkness of our grief, then we can let ourselves fall apart. We can know that we can fall apart again and again and still be held and supported, and that we're not going to disappear, and that we're not going to go down the rabbit hole, which I know I was terrified of, but that we have support. And in connection, we have something to hold on to that keeps us afloat, so that we don't have to stuff our feelings. So we don't have to keep it together to be loved and cared for, so that we can actually let our grief move. And grief comes in waves. I'm sure you guys know this or have felt this. It comes in waves. One moment we're walking along and we're not thinking about it, and you hear something. For me, it was an ambulance siren. That was a part of my trauma. I would hear a siren, and all of a sudden I was back, and I was crying, and I was feeling, and all these things were happening. And that was a wave, and then it would pass. So in community, we can hold each other in the waves of our experience, the waves, the coming and the going. And the beautiful thing about grief is when we can untangle it with our trauma, we can grief itself is pretty pure. It will move through our bodies if we let it. It will move through us, it will change us, and it will bring us closer to life. It's when we constrict and when it gets stuck is when it gets really difficult, and when it can impact our life in a way that can create more struggle and more pain. So this idea of community is in my opinion, essential. For me, it changed my life. It saved my life. And every person that has been a part of that is a part of me. When we sit together in grief and we get to know each other like human heart to human heart, not the external stories of our life or our personalities. Like when we hear and receive each other in this way, we fall in love with each other. We fall in love with the beauty that lives within every single heart. And as we're grieving, as we're touching each other's pain, we can be so inspired, actually, by the beauty and that actually lives within that brokenness and the ways that our hearts grow bigger when we're going through loss. So community is like the foundation. It is not only the cornerstone for the Grief Support Network, but it is like having someone's hand, take your hand and walk you through the journey. It's knowing you're not alone, having spaces where it can all hang out, and it's having literally a container so that you can feel it all and know you've got something to lean into, something that's got your back. I'm going to see if there's anything else important I wanted to say here before I open up to questions and answers. Okay, I have two more things I want to say. One is every human being wants to feel understood. I think it's a deep human need. And I think many of us don't feel understood in life. And then when we're grieving, we can feel even less understood. So when we are in community and we get this reflection, when we're witnessed, it can be a profound feeling of being understood. And that can help us to accept ourselves and to love ourselves more when we feel understood by the outside world. And then that empowers us to become more of who we are. So I would say on a personal level, the ways that I've witnessed my own kind of transformation through grief has been very and completely informed by being witnessed. And it's not that I became a different person in a sense of changed away from myself. I actually became more of myself. And I can sit here 15 years out from my loss and saying that I like myself more. I like this version. Grief was a call to my own authenticity because I had a community and a place to be witnessed in that. Because I found that and created that and leaned in towards that. So this idea of being understood leads towards greater acceptance, and it cultivates more compassion within us. How many people here have had the experience after loss of like feeling more compassion or empathy or understanding towards another person's loss, towards someone else in grief? Sometimes we don't know until we know, right? We go through it and all of a sudden we're like, whoa, now I get it. It softens us. It grows our heart and our capacity to feel, which is a beautiful gift. So grief will open us and make our hearts grow bigger if we let it. And the last thing I want to say before I open up our circle is showing up is enough. It's enough to show up. When we're coming together in community, we may shy away from that because we feel like we don't know what to say to someone else, like that we don't have the perfect thing to say or to make them feel better, right? So speaking now to being on the other side of it, when you're the supporter, your presence for another human being in their grief is enough. You showing up with your eye contact, with your body language, with your heart, this is presence. Listening, just hearing someone else and letting them know that you hear them, it's enough to say, I hear what you're saying. And if you don't understand, you can say, and I may not understand, but I hear you and I'm here. Your presence is enough. Your love is enough. And so this is something we can remember, not just when we're in grief ourselves, but when we're in a supporting role for someone else, that your presence and your being there will change their life. And that it doesn't matter necessarily what you say or do. It's your heart. And we hold space by being rooted in ourselves first, right? And And then by extending our presence towards another person. One thing I want to note on that, when we're grieving, we can feel very porous, meaning that other people's grief can like come into us like a sponge. It's very easy to actually take on other people's pain when we're grieving. So we have less boundary around ourselves. We have less resource, right? So one of the things that's important when we're in community grieving is to have some boundary. I call them energetic boundaries, right? And what this means is that we literally have almost like a bubble around ourselves. And I call it a bubble because it's not a wall. It's a bubble, meaning other people's experience can come in, touch us, and then it moves out. It doesn't penetrate the bubble. So there's a little barrier, right? So we don't absorb each other's pain. And it's important that we cultivate that. Sometimes when our grief is really, really brand new or really raw, that can be hard. So if that's the case, we just have to be compassionate with ourselves and kind of come in and out as we're able to. But if you imagine that bubble, it can be a way to be in community and to not be taking people's pain on. The other thing I'll say about it that helped me the most is the understanding that taking on someone else's pain or grief is not helping them. That it's actually robbing them of an opportunity to be empowered and to grow, to have their grief change them in a positive way. So if we're to take it on for them, that can be disempowering, right? For me, that was radical because as kind of a helper in my younger years, I wanted to help. I wanted to take people's pain on so they didn't feel it. But the truth is, you can't take it away. So they're going to feel it too. And if we try, then we're disempowering them to go through their journey. So in community, we're not taking on each other's stuff. We're supporting each other to feel it. And then serving as a mirror for each other to see and know ourselves in truth. And to see and know ourselves in our authentic experience. And this is why grief is such a deeply spiritual experience, actually, and creates radical transformation if we have the support, to be held and to feel it. Okay, we want me to look one more time, make sure there's nothing else. Okay. There's a lot more I could say, but I want to open us up to some questions now, and just Sarah, you can help me kind of moderate this. I will say, when Sarah reads your question, I would love it if you would put your raise hand feature in on your screen, because I'd love to look at you and to know who's asking the question. When Sarah reads your question, you can put your hand up so I know who asked it and who I'm speaking to, okay? But Sarah's going to go ahead and lead this off and speak to some of your questions.
We have not had any questions come through quite yet.
Okay. Great.
Just to reiterate, if we could throw those questions in the chat, and we will get to those.
Sarah, in the meantime, can Susan kick us off here?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Hi.
Thank you so much. Wendy, everything that you said is so profound and so helpful and moving and articulate. Thank you so much for sharing this wisdom. I wondered, you referred to some of your teachers that you wailed with, and I wanted to know if you could put their info in the chat for us as a resource.
Yes, I'm actually
Can't
gonna
hear you now. Oh, now I can. Now I can.
The teacher I was speaking of, her name is Sabanfu Somé. She actually has passed away since then, but her husband, ex-husband, Malidoma Somé, I believe, is still offering community grief rituals. Certainly a powerful experience. And Sarah, I'm wondering if you could put that into the chat for me, Malidoma Somé.
I've heard of Malidoma. I'm not sure if he's still living or not.
He passed away in December of last year.
You're right.
Right.
Did. So I don't know who's carrying on their grief ritual, but I know people are, and we actually have some local people here in the Boulder area who I know are doing grief rituals. Beth Erlander is an amazing human and therapist and practitioner. I know she's done grief rituals over the years. Wendy Cass has done grief rituals. I'm not sure if either one of them are still doing that, but I can certainly dig in on that. And those would be two people to seek out. They've done grief rituals with the Grief Support Network over the years, and I have deep respect for both of them. So
Okay, I'd also like to offer Frances Weller, I think, has carried on Maladoma's work,
yes,
if that's helpful to anybody. Okay,
yeah,
thank you. I didn't know that was who you were referring to.
yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Wendy, we do have just a comment from Tanya. Tanya says that they end their death and grief work as well as their grief groups with a mantra, reminder, closing of their stories are not my stories.
Beautiful. Yeah. So what I hear in that is, that we can be together and grieve together and not take on each other's grief. That we can do it in connection without having to take it on. Thank you. Thank you for that.
That is all that has come through the chat. So I'm not sure if you want to open up to a live Q&A.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love
We have
to.
about 10 minutes.
Great. I'd love to hear what people are feeling or thinking. I'm happy to answer any questions or comment on anything, or just to hear how you guys are all doing. And if you do want to speak, just use your raise hand feature. Thank you. Yeah, Abby, I see you. Hi. Nice to meet you. And you can unmute yourself whenever you're ready.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I'm a nurse. We don't use Zoom. I think it was so profound to talk about other cultures and like how American culture, I feel like that's the only way I've been able to grieve is like learn about other cultures, because we just stuff it. We don't talk about it. And friends definitely like kind of like faded into the distance because they were just like, oh, that's too scary for us. So I never thought about like traveling to another country though. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it seems to be a pretty shared experience of feeling kind of that pushback from our own culture and seeing that other cultures have other ways. So if you're interested in traveling and experiencing other ways, be in touch. We'd be happy to connect on that. Yeah. Anything else, Abby? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Molly? Hi.
Hi. First of all, just thank you for this. It's so great to be here and to hear all of this today. I was curious, you had mentioned like how grief and trauma, like they feel so interconnected. And you mentioned like separating and being able to grieve, but can you say more about how to separate the grief from the trauma? That feels very complicated in my brain.
Mm-hmm. It is complicated. So that could be a whole class in and of itself. So I'll just speak to it. A lot of the ways that I've been able to kind of separate this out is actually coming into my body. So our trauma in particular is such a cellular experience. So it lives in our body. And when we can connect in with that and identify where that is being held in our bodies and be able to go there and to feel that and to lean into that, it then brings it a little closer to us so we can understand it, and it brings us into direct contact. And then that allows us to understand it better. And as we can kind of bring understanding and give voice to this kind of the story behind the loss, right? Or the traumatic experience, we can touch it in our own bodies, then it brings it forward and it brings it out. And then it doesn't have to be completely intertwined and kind of interconnected inside of us. And as we start to name it, and as the trauma moves through and we can speak to the experience itself, and somatically we can kind of touch it, then the grief takes on a different form, if that makes sense, right? So grief, we may still feel the waves of sadness or that missing feeling or that longing, but it's different than a very physical experience of when trauma rises up. And in trauma is where we often get the fight, flight, freeze response, right? And I know throughout our weekend, we're going to be talking more about the neuroscience of trauma and how deeply connected that is to loss. That's where that, for me, it's freeze. That's where like that freeze or that fight or that flight happens. Grief itself is a little more fluid. So it's often by just being able to feel it and name it and come into contact with the trauma and to create new neural pathways in our bodies that it begins to come out of us, and then it can be separated out from the grief. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah. And I encourage you to come on with some of our amazing experts over the weekend who are going to get more into trauma and the neuroscience, because there's so much there. It's not my total wheelhouse, but I have deep respect for the wisdom that is there, and that's actually in our bodies around all of this. So thank you, Molly. Any other questions or comments? You're welcome to raise your hand, do it live, or to put it through the chat if that feels more comfortable.
Wendy, we did have another comment come through from Tanya. Tanya says, I'm holding space for the privilege inherent in being able to travel and how important it is that we continue to shift the Western culture so that people don't have to look elsewhere, and how we hold the tension between learning from other cultures while not appropriating.
Yeah. Yes. There's a lot there. It is a privilege, and it is a dance, right? To learn from. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom there. Mm-hmm. Autumn, hi.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Hi.
I was actually thinking of sorry, I have to. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Ay.
Oh, technology. It's okay.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering, I was getting ready to think about going traveling too. It's just me. I don't have any family. When my husband died, it was just me. So I've thought about solo traveling. Do you know of any like kind of grief groups that go? Because I'm a little nervous to travel by myself, because I'd like to go see how the other countries deal with grief, like you did.
Wow. Well, I have a lot to say on that. I'll start by just sharing with you that I actually offer grief retreats. And this is exactly what I do. So, after my time with the Grief Support Network, I transitioned into a new venture to take people on retreats. And it completely came out of my own experience of traveling and being so healed by that experience. So I also offer teacher trainings for teachers to learn how to facilitate our mindful grieving teacher training programs, and other professional retreats as well around holding safe space and deep listening. But this idea of going away somewhere to heal and to be in a beautiful place in a different environment where we can kind of step out of our life for a minute and focus fully on our own healing and learn from other people and at times other cultures. That's what this retreat thing is about. So I'm offering a few coming up in the next year. One is in Mexico in April. I'll be on Maui a few times, less cultural there, but still a beautiful place to grieve. And I'm happy to share more information around opportunities to come together with others. And I think that this idea of kind of needing to leave like our everyday life. There's something in that when we can kind of go somewhere else, we get perspective a little bit on ourselves. And when we're surrounded by others who are also grieving, it can really buoy us to practice radical self-care and to have a space where we're not multitasking with life, where we can just focus in on our own healing and learn from the places and the people where we are. So thank you for asking, and would love to have you on retreat sometime. Yeah. Thank you, Adam. Any other questions I can speak to, or comments or interests?
Wendy, I'm answering some of the questions that are popping up in the chat around being a certified teacher. And I'm telling people about the 2 different types of retreats that you do, or trainings that you do, excuse me.
Okay.
And Abby mentioned that they've learned so much from Mexican culture. And to answer everyone's questions, I will be throwing all of Wendy's contact information in the chat. So you do have all of this very handy. I know we can get very deep into what all of these trainings and retreats fully look like, but I know Wendy would be more than happy to connect with you all individually and take you through the experience.
Yeah, happy to. Sarah, is there anything like big picture that would be helpful for me to speak to speak to, or more individual connections from here?
No, I think it's going to be more individual connections.
Okay.
And I'll share with you those names and contacts too.
Great, thank you. Susan, did you have another question? I saw your hand up a moment ago.
Well, one of my questions was to do your teacher training. Does one have to already be a certified yoga teacher first?
That's one of the questions Sarah's referring to.
I see.
I'll answer it in the short term, and then we can continue our own dialogue around this, Susan, okay?
I'd
Offline.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so for the 200-hour Mindful Grieve for Teacher training, you do have to be a certified teacher coming into it, and I'm happy to share amazing places where you can get that 200-hour. The retreat in Mexico is for everybody and anybody, and it is a certificate program. So you walk away with that being certified to lead community circles, which is a lot of the process without the yoga. But it's still mindfulness based, and a lot of it is around facilitation and deep listening practices. And that is the art of sacred listening. So I'll kind of answer it briefly for now, and we can continue a conversation around that later.
Thanks, I would love that.
Yeah, happy to. I think we have time for, we probably don't. We're just about to wrap up here. But I want to say before I close, number one, I'm so here to connect with all of you who want to be in connection. This idea of community is so near and dear to my heart, as well as the Grief Support Networks. So please do reach out if you have questions or comments, or just want to connect into this network of the Center for Somatic Grieving or the Grief Support Network. And I also want to say that the Grief Support Network exists because of the generosity of everybody who walks through these doors. So we are here really as a haven and a sanctuary for everyone who's grieving, regardless of finances. Sarah has gone above and beyond to make this accessible for everybody and anybody. And so if it is in your heart to make a contribution to help support more people to be touched by these programs, I encourage you to do that. It really is a community effort in every way. The Grief Support Network is a community. So you guys are all a part of that. And thank you for having me. And I'm really honored to be a part of it and to be here with you today. So I hope to continue some of these conversations with you moving forward. And thank you for having me. Sending you all so much love.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Appreciate you as always, and this beautiful conversation around grieving and community, our cultural stigmas, all of it. So I am so excited for all of you to get connected with Wendy and get tied into, potentially bringing this work to your homes and communities. All of the facilitators that we use at GSN are trained through Wendy and the Center for Somatic Grieving. So you will naturally be tied to us as well. I have dropped all of Wendy's contact information in the chat, so make sure you grab that. It is also very accessible on the GSN website or in the session notes from today. I will leave you all to your next break. In about 15 minutes, we'll be coming back together with Willow to chat about space holding. It's going to be a great offering, so I hope to see you all there. I again ask that you do leave this meeting room and go back to the lobby, and we'll go from there. Thank you.